Hi, you're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore. Boggy Talk is recorded on Boggy Bayou in Niceville, Florida, and is hosted by Justin Wyatt and James Ross, pastors at Church on Bayshore. We typically want every matter of faith and life to have crystal clear answers, but it isn't always that easy. This podcast digs in to help Christians think with a kingdom mentality about topics that sometimes get muddy and bog us down. So let's dive in.
Hey, and welcome to Boggy Talk. Thank you for joining us for this final episode in our series about issues facing Gen Z. We look forward to what we're getting into today, but before we do that, I'm going to say hey to my co-host, James Ross. How you doing, man?
I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Justin Wyatt?
It's the last week of school, so I told someone recently, they're like, how are you doing? I was like, we're just like a ball rolling down a hill. And I'm like, and also that ball is on fire. That's how I feel. It's like,
that's good.
Into school year, we're kind of way past the point of caring, you know, and I mean, we do care, but we're also like, get your stuff done, kids. Just get it done.
Yeah.
And it's graduation. There's like you have graduates in your house. We have graduates in our house.
Don't get me started.
Because
sorry, I know that this is going to offend like our moms, our millennial moms out there, but VPK graduation, kindergarten graduation, elementary school graduation. I saw some people have middle school graduation. I don't even think high school graduation is a big deal. Why are we celebrating all this? They're not even doing anything. But in Florida, you only get held back 1 year anyway. So like,
that's right. Yeah, we have VPK graduation this year. We have kindergarten graduation. We have a fifth grader graduating, going to middle school. I guess our eighth graders missing out because they're just like, you're going to high school. Get out,
that's good.
Know?
That's good. There's so many kids at Ruckle. They're like, just get out of here.
That's right. We can't fit you all in one place anyway, and you all smell.
Yeah. Well, today's a big day in the Ross house because it's Lily Ross's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday,
the big 10,
Lily.
double
10
digits. Yeah.
Years old, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a birthday tomorrow.
It's like the only year that like her birthday is in school. Because
that's true. Yeah.
So it's like
Josiah's the same way because he's begging us not to send him to school on his on his
You
birthday.
got to go to school on your birthday.
We tried to sell it that way. You'll never have this opportunity again. He's not sold.
That's like the fun day. You walk around like, you know,
man,
I mean, when you're our age, nobody gives a.
Yeah. They're like, oh, it was your birthday? Oh,
yeah.
Oh,
okay.
okay.
If it ends in zero. If it ends in zero, it's noteworthy.
Yeah. Don't celebrate. If not, that's your
That's my weird rule. Yes. I'm obviously not sentimental except for Christmas. We talked about that before.
Yes. So as we wrap up the series today, we're talking about Gen Z, and we are talking, really wrap it up today with this issue on Gen Z and mental health. And this is one of the pressing issues for Gen Z. I think, it's become increasingly a part of the conversation just in general in the public square for all people, but specifically for Gen Z. And
I love that expression, public square, by the way. Like there's a square we all go to and have conversation.
My hometown had a square, it was like the traffic circle, the courthouse was there. And so it makes you also sound like really official.
One of my
the public
mentors,
square.
Bob Roberts, uses that phrase a lot. And it's like, I mean, I get what everybody's saying, but sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, it is. It just makes me feel like we're a little more official and serious,
Yeah, when we talk about engaging the public square.
Engaging the public square.
Man.
So how are you engaging the public square?
Yeah.
So as we talk about this, we want to talk about first why this is a big deal, why this is a big deal for Gen Z. What would you say, man?
Because they say it is.
Because the man says it.
Gen Z apparently says, hey, this is something that is a pressing concern, and tons of research I've, done. By tons of research, I mean 3 articles I've read. Shows
Wikipedia
says that mental health is really, something that matters to them a lot. And so if it matters to them a lot and we want to equip and engage and reach Gen Z, then it needs to matter to us a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think, too, we have to begin with understanding like we all kind of have a natural tendency, proclivity as far as thoughts about mental health.
Yeah.
And some people I think automatically just say, oh, that's mental, blah, blah, blah. And that's a really unhealthy view of
that
this.
doesn't sound very kind.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's not a kind response to most things.
Usually when Christy talks and I say, I know you think blah, 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 it doesn't go well in my house.
It doesn't end well. So
what do you mean, Justin, when you say mental health?
I think we're talking about the mental well-being. And I think it's hard to just talk about mental health because I think we are learning more and more how the mind and the body and really the spirit are all connected. And so when we talk about mental health, yes, we're talking about thought patterns, but those affect us emotionally. They affect us physically. They affect us spiritually as well. So we are talking about, I guess we're talking about the overall well-being of the mind.
I think what's clear by what you're saying is that it can mean a lot of things when somebody says mental health is important.
Yes,
they could mean tons of different things.
Yes, and so I think most of the time when people think about mental health, they think initially about depression, anxiety, those types of things.
Yeah.
I guess that's where the start. And then we get into deeper. I'm going to say deeper because it makes it sound more serious, but we get into other mental health disorders. There are clinical disorders, mental health disorders, and so we're touch on some of that today too. But we want to understand why this is a big deal to Generation Z. So a couple of statistics to help frame this for us. This is a study by Western Governors University's survey they did said that only 45% of Generation Z believe or would say that their mental health is good or excellent, which is 11% lower than the previous generation. Barna study says that 49% of 18 to 35-year-olds expressed anxiety over important decisions, afraid to fail. 3 in 10 said they often felt sad or depressed, lonely, and isolated from others. The suicide rate for people ages 15 to 19 has increased by 76%. The decade between 2007 and 2017. Wow. So that is significant.
Yeah, that is significant.
And right now, suicide is the second leading cause of death for adolescents after accidents.
Wow.
So that is staggering.
Yeah, that is.
And it is an important piece of this conversation. And then, today, 1 in 3, so they say 1 in 3 teens, so 33%. So if you have 3 kids, statistically, one of your 3 kids, possibly, more, but 1 in 3 teens will experience some type of anxiety disorder. And that's according to the National Institute of Health. So, those are some just hard statistics.
Yeah.
And so I think that begs the question of why? Why do we see this increasing in Generation Z? And why is this becoming an increasing issue? And I think I would point to two issues. First is that increasingly there's less of a stigma attached to mental health. Generation Z is more comfortable talking about this. And that I think is a good thing. It can be. We'll talk about this later. There's potential that it could be overemphasized, but it's increasingly less of a stigma. So they're more comfortable talking about it. But also chronic stress factors. This is chronic stress from the environment, gun violence, harassment, issues of abuse, all this. But it's not just that those are. So you may listen to some of those things and think, well, I had that growing up too. The difference is that Generation Z, because of technology, never has a break. So they're constantly aware of everything going on around them. They have technology in their pockets, in their hands all the time. Most of their learning in school this past year specifically has been electronically. So they are constantly made aware of tragic events around the world in their social groups, their peer groups, and it's accessible to them. And so they really never have a break from this onslaught of information and stress. So I think those are 2 significant factors. Anything you'd add to that?
No, I think that's important to kind of just hang out there for a second and talk about all the data that it's not necessarily causation yet. We don't know yet, but there's so much correlation between the advancement of specifically social media, but just having 24/7 technology, that and information and increased anxiety, increased suicide, increased depression. I mean, I think that anybody in their right mind realizes this is a big contributing factor to an increased lack of mental health.
I would agree with that. So let's talk about some of the pros of the awareness of this and mental health care, and really, and even some of the dangers in it too. So I would say, what are some of the pros of this? Is that
the pros of what?
The pros of caring about mental health.
Okay, got it.
And mental health in and of itself is that I think historically this has probably been ignored, not all in all, but as I mentioned earlier, we're becoming more and more aware of how the mind affects the body and the emotions, and how we're all these integrated beings. It's not just our body, it's not just the physical, but the mind affects that. And so understanding as research is showing more and more how the mind works. It's helpful. It's helpful to be able to understand your thought life, thought patterns, and address those.
Right. I think so go way back that thing up, way back to the beginning of civilization. Mm-hmm. And you always have in any society kind of two polar ways of viewing issues. And one is kind of like,
that's why we get stuck in the mud, because we're committed to not being.
That's right. One is like, hey, black and white. It's pretty simple. Early medicine was like, oh, your stomach's hurting. It must be a goblin, it must be.
I just pictured Gizmo from
you
the
must be
Gremlins.
a sinner, right? And then there's the other side that was like, hey, we think it's a little more nuanced than that. It might be this type of goblin, or whatever. It might be this type of sin. And so what settles that issue is information, right? Mm-hmm. Information is what helps us to see, okay, maybe things aren't as black and white. Maybe things aren't as simple as we put them to be. And so that leans towards this group that says it's more nuanced. And so, I'm not trying to make light of this issue, but there were people who literally viewed race as a black and white issue, literally you're black, so you must be inferior to me, or you're not the same as me. And it's okay, we all, it begins with, okay, we see that we have the same blood. We say that we have the same biology. We see that microevolution exists, and so information leads us away that it is more nuanced. So when it comes to mental health, I think that that's probably the area we've made the least advancement over the course of history, because we just don't understand the brain. So I think it's been harder to make progress in this area away from the polarized view of get your crap together, man.
That really has been kind of the mantra of a lot of people. Well, what's wrong with you? Just get over it, And so we're understanding more and more and more of, just how complicated the brain is. Really, the brain is, I'm not an expert. So, but what I have read just in studying, attachment theory, just being involved in adoption and foster care. It's fascinating.
Right. Yes.
How, it really is. And so you understand the brain is so complicated. Right. And we're just scratching the surface,
right. So,
even as advanced as we are right now. We're more advanced than we've ever been because of how history works and time works, but we're still just scratching the surface.
You just used a great example to illustrate this. So I think there was a time legitimately when a lot of people thought, okay, so if you adopt a child and they're adopted, and say they're 1, they're 2, they're an infant, and they go into your house, and they have issues. Well, they're in this great family now, allegedly great family, but they're in this allegedly great family now. And if they have problems, why do you have problems? Your life is great. And it's there's issues from a child who's not in their biological setting. And so we've got to work through that. And I think that's a very good example of how we've learned. We still have so far to go in learning, but we have learned that there are issues to work through there.
Absolutely. I think, that hits home, particularly for us as a family, because, one of our kids was brought into our family at 13 months. And so you would look at that on the surface and say, well, why does he struggle with XYZ? And we could feel that way too if we aren't doing the hard work, and it's our job to help him heal. And that's the beautiful thing about the brain is that it can heal from, trauma. And he doesn't have concrete memories of things. He just have emotional memories.
Right.
And so that's just an example. That's like, 10 more episodes on a different Boggy Talk talking through that.
So that would be the good. I mean, when we talk about this, we've just learned it's not as simple, and through mental health, professionals, people can get healthy. They can function better. They can have, I hate the word normal life, because it's like, what is a normal life? But, they can be comfortable in their own skin, comfortable in their own brain. But I think that we need to address that, as with anything, so there's two polar ends, right? Like, if you just hang out and things are nuanced and you don't have enough information, then you really get caught up in theories. Right. And so, like, a lot of our psychology today is based upon Freud. I mean, it is, I know that we're kind of advancing past that in many ways, but so much still of psychology is based on Freudian theories. Yeah. Theories. And so I do see amongst, some of what is mental health counseling, like, therapy, those kind of things, like just too much weight on theories. And I would say also maybe you're writing down, so you're kind of scaring me right now.
No, it's just so I don't forget something later.
An elevation of those theories, specifically divorcing that therapy and counseling from a biblical worldview.
I agree with that. I think because I believe, it's all integrated. And so the mind is integrated with the spirit. And so when there's that divorce of those things, then you just are focusing on how to live, like how to get through, I think, rather than like the holistic picture of well-being. That's great. And I think, like you said, we still are figuring this out. And if you're seeing, or you're pursuing seeing a mental health professional or a counselor, I mean, if they're honest, just like we would want to be honest as a pastor, people assume that we know everything sometimes. And I'm like, we don't know everything. I'm still figuring a lot of things out. And I think an honest counselor, mental health professional, they should still be learning, because it's not all figured out. And I think, just like, a danger in this is that we can be too quick to jump to conclusions. And I think just as you're seeking help, which I believe, we'll talk about this later, like we should, counseling is great. Mental health care is great. It does have, just like all things, there's limitations. But just like you would be judicious in selecting a doctor for your physical care, you want to do the same in selecting a provider for mental health, because we can too easily just write things off.
Yeah. So if part of mental health counseling is, and different levels of that is, hey, this person has been told that they are this by themselves, by other people for so long, and we've got to help them see that's not who they are, But then you begin to tell them, but they're this over and over again, and you're the doctor, you're the expert, then they're going to start thinking that is the
self-fulfilling
issue. Right. So it's like rewiring not to what's healthy, but to just a different directive. So, and with this, like, it's very important. Like medicine, we practice medicine. Well, I don't practice medicine, but like that's what we do, right? And so doctors, like cardiologists, basically had to figured out that pig valves work, and heart valve. Like,
wow,
who experimented with that? But I mean, it's because people were dying. Like, so they had to figure hey, we're going to try this, right? And so like, they've learned so much now that by and large, a cardiologist would be like, hey, this is going to work if I do this based on what's wrong in your heart. Here's the problem with mental health is that we just don't fully know even what's wrong a lot of times, because we don't have the science that backs it up. And so it's more of I'm not saying it's like a guess, like we're just, but it's more of a practice than it is than cardiology, because we just haven't gotten enough information. So we have to be aware of that. And then again, I just want to say that there is no doubt that there is an overemphasis. So where I said there's polar ends, there is an overemphasis in many cases in the fact that, hey, there's something wrong with you, versus, hey, maybe there are some lifestyle choices. There are some ways you're thinking that we can correct. And so I think a lot of times, not all, but many are quick to say, hey, here's the diagnosis. Here's what's wrong. Let's medicate. Let's do those things. And while I think that is necessary.
There's a place for that.
Yeah, there is. We've elevated it a little too much.
It's like we can easily jump to that,
right?
Rather than like, okay, that if you get to that point, there's probably stepping stones along the way.
Right.
There should be, it makes me think of, I saw this recently. It was a special that 60 Minutes did actually. So this isn't like a Christian perspective per se, but it was talking about, it was a feature on individuals who had transitioned from one gender to the other, who were retransitioning or detransitioning is the official term, I believe, back to their original gender. And all of them were saying how there were protocols that should have been in place with the help that they received, the counselors, psychiatrists, whoever they saw. But basically they went and said, I want to do this. And second appointment in, started receiving hormone therapy.
Wow.
And had second appointment. And so then one of them literally said, they never actually asked me the question why I wanted to do this or why I was feeling this way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's because of the mindset is like, that's a complicated conversation, or I should go back to nuanced conversation about, standards and practices and mental health and, not just affirming choices rather than like, let's get to the root of why.
Right.
But that goes back to,
and they're coming from a bias.
Yes.
If they're
bias,
secular,
exactly.
and this is an increasing part of secular medicine is this, the fluidity of sexuality. And if you're this person who's 15 years old, 16 years old, 25 years old, your life, you just feel out of control. There's things going in your brain you can't think. And somebody says, here's the answer.
Yeah.
And they're an expert. Mm-hmm. And it feels good in the first place. Because
like,
anything,
I wanted that, yeah.
Any rescue feels good in that moment.
Yeah. There's no doubt there's distress. Like there's not minimizing the distress that these individuals felt in seeking. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It blows me away. And to me, I'm thinking, even if, let's just say you are 100% supportive of gender transition, that the second that you would still say, but you got to ask the questions before, that blew me away that it was that fast, that it was like,
which shows again, the overemphasis, the move away from science, like, and this is where as Christians, like all these things are fine tools. Like everything we have is a fine tool, but we always need to say, how does this filter through Scripture? Mm-hmm. So how does mental health filter through the Scriptures? That would be really the question. And I think that it's nuanced. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe a place is if somebody came to us, place to be right now is if somebody came to us and said like, hey, I'm struggling with anxiety, or I'm struggling with depression, or, I think I might have something else going on. Like, what do we do?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is we talk to them and ask questions, and you ask these questions like, "Hey, I want to ask like, why do you feel this way? What is triggering?" And then you ask the questions like, "Is this like?" You kind of try to. We are not professional counselors, but you do try to get a little bit to the root of what is going on. Like, is this because of circumstances? Is this life? Is this your own choices? You're overwhelmed. Are you anxious? Are you just feeling overwhelmed? Like let's try to discern. And from there, honestly, I am a huge proponent of like, I will walk alongside you and check in with you and ask you questions, but we have to recognize our limitations. So I will refer people to counseling often and say, hey, you should. Or if it's not a professional counselor, at least someone that I know who maybe can identify with their struggles and they can hear it from someone who's maybe lived it or living it. And you need to talk to this person. And then from there, walk alongside those people. Yeah.
So you're right. I think questions as to what is triggering this is where I would start. Like, okay, so you say you feel anxious. Let's just use that. Tell me more about when you feel anxious, what makes you feel anxious. And a lot of times, it is, I spend all my money on stupid stuff or, even okay stuff. And I'm constantly worried about tomorrow, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that's not necessarily an anxiety disorder. That's just like, anxiety from being sinful, like, and the choices you make. I'm addicted to pornography or I'm always watching pornography and I'm worried my wife's going to catch me and she caught me. Like, that anxiety is actually like guilt, yes, and so there are those situations, but I would say that some people who I've met with, like, they're anxious all the time. And it is almost illogical. And that's where you're going to say, okay, I think that you need to talk to someone who has more experience with people in your situation. And sometimes like it can be managed. Like, it's not necessarily something that needs to be medicated. It's like, it's something that can be managed and often sometimes like it's heightened, through certain situations, and you might need to remove yourself from those situations. But sometimes, like, legitimately, it's just going to be something they're going to have to, be treated for a long time. I will say this, like, I used to be like, hey, let's, if somebody was really struggling with depression or whatever, like, let's go through the Bible first before we ever get treatment. And now I'm kind of more like, you know what? If being on medicine allows us to then talk and maybe get you to a place where you don't need medicine, like, let's do that. But maybe we should start there just so you can begin to even think clearly.
Yeah, that is a great point. I think sometimes that is what's needed. And I think there's, in the past, has been this hesitancy in the church in general, not talking about a specific church, but in general to lean into mental health, to lean into counseling, psychiatry, because there has been like, well, you can just pray this away. You can just, if you have enough faith, it will go away. And I
talked about that a couple weeks ago in church.
And it's
church history was figuring this out.
Exactly. And I think, that can be a very damaging thing to say to someone. And I personally believe that can be the step of faith. Counseling can be the step of faith. Medication can be the step of faith. And the goal isn't that we necessarily ultimately as a Christian, in all things,
pray away the cancer.
Yeah,
pray.
Yeah, but also,
but God says, "Here's your answer." There's the Mayo Clinic.
Yes, go. Yeah, it's so frustrating when you hear people who've had that said to them or who think that, and you're just like, well, you wouldn't say that to someone who has cancer. You wouldn't just say, well, you would say, let's pray. We believe God can heal, and it's absolutely the same. It's the same with any kind of mental health thing, and it could be. It honestly could be for someone that this is going to be a struggle for their entire life. And as a church, we don't need to minimize that. We need to say, we're here for you. Yeah. We're going to walk with you. And it's okay. That treatment can be the step of faith. And I think there's been a hesitancy in the church to just say that because we think, well, we could just, it's not faith. And I just would strongly disagree. And I think you would too. Granted, all the things you just said, we want to get to the root. We want to address, because there is a spiritual part of this as well. We want to address those things, but to say that to someone is really and
I think arrogant is right. I think that's where, like, what I would say is anybody who is struggling with one of these issues, doesn't feel mentally healthy, or has somebody they're going through. Like, I'm not saying in any way, which I haven't at all, that we don't. So here's what I'm saying: whatever approach we're taking to dealing with that, the end goal for the Christian is so that I can live a life that glorifies God on mission for him. Mm-hmm. And I think mental health often is not going to have that as the end goal for you. Mm-hmm. So you really need to say, hey, like, a lot of things are wonderful tools, but terrible masters. Right. And I think that science is a wonderful tool and a terrible master. Psychology is a wonderful tool and a terrible master. So to be sure that, like, I'm getting mentally healthy just as I would be getting physically healthy so that I could serve the Lord.
Right.
And if my mental health counseling or my mental health approach is leading me away from serving the Lord, then clearly I need to go see someone else, or I need to figure something else out. Like that's so nuanced.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, we have to check our hearts and say, I said this a few weeks ago in a sermon, like, why do we pray for health? Any kind of health. Is it so that we'll just be better?
Right.
Or is it so that we could serve the Lord?
Right.
Now, when you're overwhelmed by something, like, it's hard to really think on that, but ultimately, like, that is the goal.
Yeah. So let's talk about how the church supports Gen Z in this. I think that is a question for us. It's, as Gen Z is going to be dealing with this. And then, I don't think, could be wrong, but, Gen Z is growing up and they're going to have kids. And I don't see this issue getting any less complicated.
No.
Or, any less clean and tidy. It's going to, I think it'll be even more pervasive. So how do we support Gen Z, equip Gen Z and the parents of Gen Z to be aware and to address mental health issues? I think the first is we cultivate in our churches places where people do feel okay sharing their struggles and pointing people to the truth. You know, I think, so often it's like people don't want to share this because it's personal. It makes us feel vulnerable. It makes us feel weak. It makes us feel not. And in truth, it is because we can't do this on our own. We do need someone outside of ourselves. We do need a savior. And if we have communities filled with grace, like we will have people who do feel okay sharing this. And I think that's a first step. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a parent that struggles with a child in mental health. So at first I think like one thing is to just make sure that whoever it is that is dealing with their child in mental health, like that they're getting educated, because like, so if your child breaks their bone and the doctor has one or two things, let it naturally heal, or do like, rods, plates, screws. Screws and rods and plates are the quick fix, but there are consequences potentially from that. So based on the severity, you might not want to do that. Doctor's pretty good about that, but there was a time when doctors like, some doctors like, this is the easy thing, so this is what we're going to do. And people became more educated on those issues. Same with some kids. When you're giving children at a very young age these kind of medicines, like there are potential consequences, and I'm not the parent. So I'm not, I make those decisions for my children. You make those decisions for your children, but I just want to make sure you're educated on this issue, that your doctor is helping explain this issue, and that really that is, depending on the severity, you might see what other things can be done. And again, I'm not telling you what to do. You need to lean on other experts there. So I think that, and I think most of all, like, dude, and I'm telling you this, if you're watching this right now or listening to this right now, if your kid has any kind of behavioral or psychological issues, it's okay. Like, you don't need to apologize to me ever for their behavior. Gosh, stop making people feel bad about their children struggling with those things. I mean,
that gets back to the stigma. Like, we've got to help people. Just like we're figuring this out. Just like mental health providers, we're figuring this out. I think, I would encourage parents too, even if your child isn't, what you would say they're struggling with, whatever. We want to be keenly aware that they probably all will struggle at some level mentally, regardless, and to be aware and cultivating within our families this conversation, like checking in on being aware of signs. I think we just assume our kids are okay because they may seem okay, but I think our kids carry a lot, and we have to be aware of that, make time for them, address their hearts, like help them share, give them words. And I think for me, I think a lot of times I want my kids to share because I can tell something's going on. And a great tool for me has been telling my kids about one of my own struggles. Like, you know what? Can I tell you about this story? This story came to mind the other day, and
so you moved away from telling them about all my struggles. You're like, hey,
Pastor James. Yeah, that's right. I tell him a story from when I was a kid, and I did this with one of my kids the other day because I could just sense he was one of our kids who's in the middle. We got 6, so one of the kids in the middle, and I could just tell that he was just struggling with being in the middle. And I was like, can I just tell you something? Like, when that happened when I was a kid, because I was a middle child, and it helped him, like, because of his age, he couldn't articulate how he's feeling, but you could just see in his behavior. Yeah. Like something's off.
I'm thankful you brought that up, because we've mostly dealt with like mental health from like, when there's a severe issue. I mean, most of our conversation, but in general, mental health, like if we think it's dangerous that Gen Z is moving more and more towards like being diagnosed and all these things, then we do need to realize like just mental health in general is a part of our life.
All of us, yeah.
And it looks different for all of physical health looks different from you. You're skinny all the time. I don't know.
I wish.
But like, you know,
to work.
But for me, like I am healthy, but like I'm just going to constantly battle with like, you know, making sure I'm not gaining too much fat, those kind of things. And like all of us with mental health need to constantly also just be watching this. And I think you're talking about just, you know, a child that doesn't necessarily have a mental health issue, quotation mark, but you're ensuring their mental health. And I think that's important.
That's a great point. Like being sure, like we have to address those things on a regular basis with all of our kids.
Yeah.
And I think as a church, we want to be a place that's equipping parents to do that as well.
And Gen Z is saying, hey, we realize this is an issue and we're looking somewhere for guidance on this issue. And if the church isn't giving a real legit guidance, still looking to, you know, medicine, but like isn't speaking to that, then they're going to go to secular guidance on it. And I think that's going
to feel good in the moment.
Yeah.
And ultimately,
because it's affirming usually. Yeah.
Could possibly lead to a destructive place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So wrapping it up, we just want to encourage you as listeners, part of the church or not part of a church, we want to encourage you, like, this is a real issue. And there's not there's not necessarily a one way to approach it kind of approach. There's no magic silver bullet, but we want to say as a church, we are committed to the spirit, the mind, the body, the whole thing. And creating this place where we are open to talk about this, where we're not quick to judge, quick to write things off. What the Bible says, we are quick to listen. And, Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 10, he says that, the weapons of our warfare are not flesh and blood, but divine power to destroy strongholds. And we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion or thought raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive. And I think that is really a mental health picture, the Bible, like biblical mental health is that taking every thought captive and bringing it into obedience to Jesus Christ. Yeah. And that will happen. That can happen in a lot of different ways. It happens in community. It can happen through biblical counsel. It can happen through mental health professionals counseling. All of the above could be the way that happens. Right.
If you take the Shema, and you take what Jesus said about the Shema in the Gospels, and collectively he said, love the Lord your God with all your mind. And so, it is right to think, how can I be my mind be in a place where I'm able to be as healthy as possible and love the Lord with my life. So I think that's good stuff. I do have one question for you. Did you make up Western Governors University?
It does sound like me neither, but
what is their mascot?
I just picture some person with a big hat.
I've just caused anxiety for anybody who graduated from there.
That's right.
So kind of defeated the purpose
all three
of this podcast.
It's an accredited university. I don't know. I found it online. Well, we're thankful you have joined us for this episode of Boggy Talk. And as always, we may have raised more questions than we've given answers, but that's why we get stuck in the mud. That's so thank you so much for joining us. Hey, next week, join us for a special edition of Boggy Talk for Father's Day. We are excited about that. And then in the coming weeks, we're going to be talking about some specifics with this summer is the Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting, and you will be attending that. So we're going to talk some takeaways, some things to be aware of that are going on just in the greater convention. How do you say this? The big SBC.
I'm just going to let you keep trying here.
That's right. That's why they don't hire me to moderate the SBC. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us. We hope you'll tune in next time.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.